When death comes, what truly matters? Buddhist wisdom. If you knew, not as an idea, but as something you felt in the center of your chest right now, that your time here is limited, what would you stop carrying? Not what would you start doing? Not what goals would you chase faster, but what would you finally put down? When death actually comes close, something rare happens. The noise of ordinary life falls silent. Everything we thought was urgent reveals itself for what it always was: noise. And in the stillness, we see with painful clarity what we have been avoiding, what we have been postponing, what we treated as though it could wait forever. The Buddha saw that this clarity should not require a crisis to appear. He saw that most of us receive it and then lose it again. The fog returns, work resumes, and within weeks, we are living as though we have forever once more. So he taught the recollection of death not to make us afraid, but because most of us are already afraid. We just do not know it. And if you stay with that question long enough, you begin to realize it is not really about death at all. It is about what we have been asleep to, about what we keep reaching for that was never able to save us. The Buddha had a name for that kind of sleep. He called it pamada, and the practice he offered, maranasati, was meant to end the sleepwalking. So this is not a conversation about dying. It is a conversation about what it means to actually be alive, once you stop pretending that you have forever. We all know we will die. That sentence is so obvious it almost means nothing. But watch what the mind does with it. It files the fact away. It agrees in theory, and then returns to planning next year, next decade, as though that knowledge changes nothing about today. We keep postponing the things that matter most, not because we are lazy, but because somewhere deep down, we believe there will always be more time. More time to be honest, more time to forgive, more time to actually look at what is happening inside us. The Buddha called this pamada, and it is one of the most important concepts in his entire teaching, though it rarely gets the attention it deserves. Pamada is usually translated as heedlessness or carelessness, but it is something much deeper. It is the state of a mind that lives as though actions carry no real consequences, as though youth and health will not fade, as though death is something that happens to other people. It is not a single mistake. It is the fog in which most of human life takes place. In the Upajjhatthana Sutta, the Buddha gave 5 reflections for everyone, not only monks, but lay people, men, women, anyone willing to be honest about being human. He taught that we should reflect each day. I am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness. I am subject to death, have not gone beyond death. I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that will I fall heir. 5 reflections, not philosophy, not metaphysics, just the bare truth of what it means to have a human life. And then the Buddha explained why these reflections matter. And this is where the teaching cuts deeper than it first appears. He said there are beings who are intoxicated with a living person's intoxication with life. And because of that intoxication, they conduct themselves badly in body, speech, and mind. That word, intoxication, mada in Pali, is the root of pamada, and the Buddha used it with precision. He did not say we should not enjoy life. He said there is a kind of blindness that appears when conditions are favorable. A fog that makes us feel exempt from change. Inside that fog, we treat people carelessly. We waste years on things that do not matter. We assume the ones we love will always be there whenever we are ready to give them our full attention. This is pamada, not laziness, not ignorance. A deep, quiet intoxication with conditions that are already changing, and the inability to see that we are intoxicated. The 5 reflections exist to clear that fog. When the sutta describes someone who has fully taken these reflections to heart, it says something remarkable. They overcame all intoxication with health, youth, and life, as one who sees renunciation as rest, not as one who gives up on life, as one who finds rest. The release from intoxication is not a burden, it is a relief. We spend most of our lives building careers, identities, relationships, reputations. We build an image of who we are and pour enormous energy into keeping it intact. None of this is wrong in itself, but underneath the building, there is usually an unspoken hope. If I get this right, I will be safe. If I earn enough, love enough, become enough, something in me will finally be secure. Death is the teaching that says, no arrangement will hold. Start with the body. We feed it, train it, decorate it, identify with it completely. And then, slowly or suddenly, it changes. Strength leaves. Illness does not ask for permission. And there is a moment where you realize, this body was never mine the way I thought it was. It arrived through conditions I did not choose, and it will leave on terms I cannot set. The suffering we feel is often not about the body itself. It is about the distance between what the body is doing and what we demanded it to be. The same pattern lives in relationships. We love someone, and without noticing, the mind forms a quiet contract. This person will stay, remain the way I know them, continue to fill the space in me that needs filling. But people change. They get sick. They die. And what we discover in grief is not only that we loved them, but that somewhere along the way, we had started to need their permanence. We confused loving someone with owning their presence. Anyone who has sat beside someone they love in their final hours knows what falls away. No one thinks about their career or who was right in the last argument. They think about the people they love. They feel the weight of all the attention they did not give when there was still time. Death strips everything down to this, and what remains is always simpler than what we spent our lives building. The 4th reflection asks us to sit with this directly. I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. Not might, will. And yet, when you actually let this truth in, something in the quality of your love shifts. You listen more carefully, because this conversation will never happen again in exactly this way. You stop saving the important words for later. You become more present, not less, because presence is the only honest response to impermanence. But the Upajjhatthana Sutta goes one step further, and this step is what transforms the reflection from something painful into something liberating. The Buddha taught that when we reflect, I am subject to death, we should also remember, I am not the only one subject to death, who has not gone beyond death. To the extent that there are beings, past and future, passing away and re-arising, all beings are subject to death. This is not just a philosophical observation. This is the moment where isolation dissolves. Your grief is not only yours. Every person you pass on the street is carrying the same truth inside them. And when that recognition truly lands, the wall between you and the rest of the world becomes thinner. Not because you try to feel compassion, but because you see that you were never separate from everyone else's fragility. And what death strips away, the body, the roles, the presence of the people we love, leaves us standing before a question that goes deeper than loss. If none of this lasts, do our actions still mean anything? There is a quiet trap in the teaching of impermanence. If everything passes, it is tempting to conclude that nothing matters. Why be careful with your words if the moment disappears? Why choose kindness if it leaves no trace? The Buddha closed that trap with the fifth of his 5 reflections. It does not say we own nothing. It says, I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that will I fall heir. Listen to that language. My actions, that is the only inheritance the Buddha recognized as truly ours, the one thing death cannot confiscate. This is the teaching of karma, and its real meaning is not what popular culture has made of it. It is not the universe keeping score. It is something much more immediate. Every moment of patience makes patience more available next time. Every moment of contempt makes contempt more familiar. What we call character is the accumulated shape of what we have been practicing. And we are practicing something in every moment, whether we know it or not. You can see this most clearly in the places where no one is watching. The way you speak about someone who is not in the room. The thought you choose to release instead of feeding. The moment you could react with cruelty, and instead you pause. You do not need a dramatic transformation to begin. You do not need to stand on a mountaintop or sit in a monastery. In each of these quiet choices, the heart is being shaped, without fanfare, without anyone knowing. And that shaping is the only thing death cannot undo. This is also where death becomes most confronting. Not philosophically, but personally. Because most of us know, somewhere inside, that we have not been living in full alignment with what we say matters. We say that relationships are everything, and then give the people closest to us the most distracted version of ourselves. We say that honesty matters, and then spend years avoiding one true conversation. Death brings our stated values and our lived values into the same light. And what you do with that gap, that is the real work. Not perfection, not some spiritual ideal, just the willingness to see clearly and to begin from where you actually are. In the Maranasati Sutta, the Buddha told his monks, mindfulness of death, when developed and pursued, is of great fruit and great benefit. It gains a footing in the deathless, has the deathless as its final end. And then, something very human happened. Several monks, one after another, described how they practiced. One said he considered he might live for a day. Another said half a day. Another said the time it takes to eat a meal. Another said the time it takes to chew and swallow a few morsels of food. The Buddha listened to all of them. Then he said something that must have shaken the room. All of them were dwelling heedlessly. They were developing mindfulness of death, slowly. The only monk the Buddha praised was the one who reflected, "Oh, that I might live for the interval that it takes to breathe out after breathing in, or to breathe in after breathing out." That monk was developing mindfulness of death, acutely, for the sake of ending the effluence. One breath. That is the unit of time the Buddha used to measure a human life. When you truly sit with that, not in the head but somewhere deeper, most of what fills the mind becomes very quiet. The argument you have been replaying for days loses its grip. The resentment you have been carrying feels heavier than it is worth. what comes forward is simpler. This moment, this person in front of you, this one chance to be fully here. What arises from this practice, from truly letting the reality of death reach you, is appamada, the direct opposite of the fog we have been talking about. But most people misunderstand what appamada actually is. It is not hypervigilance, monitoring every thought, controlling every moment, living in anxiety about whether you are doing enough. That would just be another kind of clinging. Appamada is something far more fundamental. It is the quality of a mind that has genuinely felt three things. This life will end. What I do with it is shaping my heart right now. And this understanding is not something to revisit occasionally. It is something to live from. And it is not about effort in the way we usually think. A person living in appamada may work relentlessly, but all of that energy is poured into things that cannot deliver what they promise. A person living in appamada may appear outwardly ordinary, but their attention has quietly shifted to what actually shapes the quality of the mind. They have stopped investing in what cannot be kept and started attending to what can be transformed. This is why the Buddha considered appamada the foundation of everything else. Without it, generosity is occasional. Morality is convenient. Inner work is something we plan to do after life becomes less busy. With appamada, every practice becomes sincere. The Dhammapada expresses this with absolute clarity. Heedfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. The heedful die not. The heedless are as if dead already. The heedless are as if dead already, not will die, already dead, right now, while still breathing, while still making plans for next year. Because a life lived inside the fog of appamada, no matter how busy, how successful, how full of activity, is a life that has not yet begun. Appamada is the beginning, but it is the path, not the destination. It carries you toward something, and what it carries you toward is the deepest thing the Buddha ever pointed to. If you have followed this far, you may have noticed a single pattern running through everything. The intoxication, the suffering around loss, the gap between what we say matters and how we live. All of it sustained by one thing: holding on. Holding on to comfort, to self-image, to the hope that if we grip tightly enough, something will finally stay. This is where the Buddha's teaching goes somewhere that no other reflection on death reaches. Most responses to death end by encouraging people to appreciate life more, savor the moments, stop sweating the small things. There is warmth in that. But the Buddha was pointing somewhere much deeper. He was pointing to the fact that the very thing we are trying to protect, this sense of a permanent me that must be saved, must be continued, must be made secure, is itself what keeps suffering alive. Not because there is something wrong with us, but because we have been pouring our life into defending something that was never as solid as it felt. And every time we grip harder, the suffering tightens. You already know this, not from philosophy, from your own life. Think of a time you held on to something, a grudge, an image of yourself, a need to be right, long after it had stopped serving you. Remember how heavy it was. Now think of a time you finally let something go, not because someone told you to, but because you were ready. Remember the lightness. That lightness is not a small thing. That lightness is the direction the entire Buddhist path is pointing toward. When you put down a resentment you have been carrying for months, there is a freedom that no achievement can match. When you stop rehearsing your defense and simply allow yourself to be seen as you are, something in the chest opens. When someone you love is speaking and you are truly there, not drifting, not performing care, but actually present, That quality of attention is already a taste of what the Buddha meant by the deathless. Not because presence alone is the end of the path, but because in that moment, the grip has loosened, and what remains is closer to who you actually are than anything the defended self ever offered. The Maranasati Sutta says that this practice, fully developed, gains a footing in the deathless, has the deathless as its final end. And the deathless, anatta, is not a place where I get to live forever. It is what is already here when the craving, the holding, and the fear of letting go have finally been released. The commentary on the Dhammapada says it simply, Nibbana is called anatta, as there is no aging and death, because there is no birth. We may be far from that completion. That is all right. Because freedom is not all or nothing. It meets you wherever you are willing to loosen your grip. You do not need to be free of all craving to taste freedom. You only need to see one craving clearly, to watch it arise, to feel its pull, and to let it pass without giving it your hands and your voice. In that moment, something softens. The same with anger, the same with fear. Every time these states visit, and you let them move through without turning them into harm, the heart learns something no amount of reading can teach. These states do not own it. They visit, they pass, and what remains is always quieter, always more free. The Upajjhana Sutta says that when a practitioner fully takes these reflections to heart, the fetters are abandoned, the obsessions destroyed. That is not poetic decoration. It is a description of what happens when the heart stops clinging. The Buddha's final words, just before he passed, point to exactly this. Conditions fall apart. Persist with diligence. Everything conditioned, this body, this mind, this world, moves toward its end. The response is not despair and not grasping. The response is appamada, the deep sincerity that opens the door. And what lies behind that door is not something you need to acquire. It is something you have been carrying underneath everything else. A freedom that was always here, waiting for you to stop looking elsewhere. What truly matters in the end was never what you managed to hold on to. Nothing can be held. What truly matters is what you were willing to let go of, and whether, in the letting go, the heart found its way home.